computer. Okay. Here we go. Okay, good evening. Welcome, everyone, to another exciting class from FractalU.com. I'm Dan Winter, FractalField.com. And we have many guests with us. Jenny with the LucidDreamTeam.com is with us, our partner Patrick, and many friends. And we were just talking with Dan Mack about alchemy. That was cool. But our featured guest for this evening is Tufan Guven, who has been with us on fractal field science for some years and does serious homework and makes excellent presentations, which are gentle introductions often. And Valerie likes Tufan because she can understand him better than me. So actually, we're working on a new book. Actually, it's a new book on Planck fire, charge collapse, cause of gravity and consciousness. And Tufan is planning a trip over here. We're going to have some fun with Tufan and his lady. It's exciting.
Very excited.
Cool. So without further ado, I think, Jenny is, the LucidDreamTeam.com is really attracted wonderful interest, and Jenny is shepherding that beautifully. There's a core group there, and so I don't know if you had any specific announcements you wanted to make, Jenny, or is that good? Or
no, mostly apart from waiting to see how we are co-creating this together. And we had the thought that maybe linking up or creating a buddy system between the groups so that we're all nesting within each other would be a very sensible thing to do. So stay tuned, and thank you for your patience.
So LucidDreamTeam.com has critical mass, thanks to Jenny, and we're cooking, which is a good thing. That's exciting. And let's see, I saw that Russ is here. Russ, did you have a short announcement about upgrade to the Discord conversation for FractalU?
Yes. Blessings, everybody. Thank you, Tribe, for being here. I'm very, very flattered to see everybody here. I would like to make an announcement that on Discord, we currently have roughly 185 members. We made some updates to the Discord, if everybody saw. So the more engagement that you guys have with the Discord, it will level up your profile and have more interaction. We'll have more channels in there, basically, for the Lucid Dream Team. More anytime somebody has any questions, it'll be more structured. So I'm happy to introduce that. Anybody that's in there could see that. So with the Discord, we're going forward with the Lucid Dream Team, the buddy system. I've had several conversations with the community, and yeah, great conversations. So keep joining, and thank you, everybody, for being here.
The interest is high. We're grateful. And thank you to Russell for organizing the software, et cetera, around the Discord conversation, and also helping redo the software for FractalU.com website. Okay, so now, without further ado, Tufan is going to be speaking about advances in fractal field science, embedding, entanglement, and all kinds of cool stuff tonight. I saw some of his graphics. It looks amazing. So without further ado, Tufan Guven, geometricmodels.com. Tufan, you're on.
Thank you, Dan. Hi, everyone. This is Tufan Guven, representative at geometricmodels.org, where you can find all sorts of sacred geometric modeling and design tools. Shall I share my presentation then?
Sure, you should be able to share your screen fine. I think go right ahead.
Okay. Hold on a second. All right. So
yes.
Today,
it's working. Good.
This presentation is about entangled dimensions and simulation argument, brief history of holographic sciences, advancement of virtual realities and fractal systems.
Remember, not to interrupt, but just a little context here. We have always said that entanglement perfected is in concept embedding perfected, which would be perfected by golden ratio phase conjugation. So we've always said that when conventional physics says that entanglement is the beginning of action at a distance through wormholes, we think that phase conjugation connecting longitudinal nodes is a more detailed description. Anyway, so that I think that's just exciting that Tufan is giving depth to that conversation. Go ahead, Tufan.
Thank you. So this one is our main formula. So this is a big subject when we talk about universe and the simulation argument, because it contains almost everything, not almost, like totally everything. There is nothing outside of that. So in any given system, in any given dynamic system, in order to build a healthy discussion, we would first need to ask specific questions about the nature of that dynamic system. And with the universe as well, I believe that one would first need to go over the specific questions like who created the system, what is the creation process, what is the purpose of the system, and so on, because these are so fundamental that any different answer that you will give can change the outcome and can change the discussion. So this is why I would first like to give you my take on that, so that you know where I'm coming from when we discuss these issues. So who created the system? For me, I would say collective consciousness. And what is the creation process? And it is golden ratio perfected fractal phase conjugation as the underlying cause of all centripetal and self-organizing systems. And the purpose of the system, I would suggest collective bliss experience or becoming a shareable wave. And what are the inputs to the system and how do they affect the outputs? Now, the inputs, I would suggest frequencies. I can also add emotions and feelings, and the outputs would be the perceived reality. And what are the dynamics of the system and how do they influence its behavior? And the dynamics would be the physical laws, natural laws, and how does the system respond to changes in its inputs or parameters? And I think to answer this question, we would define what makes a charge seed to grow, or how would we define a bioactive field? And are there any critical or unstable regions in the system's behavior, and how can they be identified and avoided or controlled? And here I would suggest going over the frequency signature of the universe, the universal frequency caduceus, and understanding phi and the tuning fork Planck times, Planck distance, Planck constant. And if we continue multiplying Planck with the exponents of golden ratio, we would reach to specific phase conjugate implosive thresholds to support biology and all sorts of heavenly bodies. So this is just to create a foundation. And I would also like to go over the natural laws as well, because we mentioned here the physical laws and natural laws, so that we go over that very briefly. I'm not going to spend much time because we already did that in our previous lecture at FractalU.com curriculum. And anybody who wants to find that, maybe they can find the YouTube link in the description part of this video when we upload it on YouTube. So
regarding the previous slide, probably the essential visualization is Tufan's famous donut. When the donut recursively turns inside out, that implosion, phi times Planck, creates that centripetal force that connects the center to that potentially infinite array longitudinal, and that's where the local system becomes connected. And so it's that recursive turning inside out that starts that, just like the first word of Genesis, Bereshith, is a donut turning inside out. So that's kind of a visualization that puts that discussion together nicely.
And that one requires understanding the centrifugal and centripetal forces, which we also went over in our last discussion.
Exactly.
So I would like to focus on the second point here. I'm not going to go over each one of those as we already did before. So the law of correspondence, as above, so below, reflecting concurrent qualities. Now, this is very important in our case about our discussion tonight, because everything is fractal in the universe. Fractality is everywhere. It covers everything from psychology to consciousness, from micro to macro, everywhere. And I see correspondence as a great reflection of the fractal understanding. And I would like to use the law of correspondence and this idea as a cornerstone of this discussion and put it at the center point. And I think that our consciousness creates this universe, both individually and collectively. And this has been touched upon by many traditions and many philosophers. One of the most famous ones is Plato. In Plato's allegory of the cave, we see this idea talked about. You can see that there's a wall inside a cave, and on one side of the wall, on the left side, there are some people chained to the wall, and they have always been there. They have never seen outside for their lives. And you can also see the shades of specific symbols that are produced from the other side of the wall. But the people can only see the shades of the symbols. And they think that this is all there is. When there is an environmental change in any variable, they think that it's because of the symbols that are passing through over there. So they never know what happens behind the wall. And this allegory tells us that the reality that we see, that we perceive, its source is actually coming from another dimension that we cannot see or we are not aware of. So this is one of the examples from early philosophers. And we also see this understanding, we come across with this understanding in Hermetism. That which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below to accomplish the miracles of wanting. Again, there's this sense of fractality, self-similarity.
The shadows on the wall of the cave metaphor, one good way to think about that, about going to the next dimension, it was always said that if you took the spiral on the 7-color donut that Tufan sells, which is a 3D spiral, and then just make shadows of only that spiral, in 3D, the donut is there and alive, but the shadow on the wall of the cave is the 2D shadow of that spiral indexed by tetratilt, is basically Hebrew and Sanskrit. So Hebrew and Sanskrit is a shadow on flatland in 2D of what in 3D is in fact a torus turning inside out. That's an example of launching yourself to the next dimension from the shadow to the reality.
Yeah, we should have edited this slide with the shadows of the spirals, I guess. Another example from Sufism, there is a concept of the unity of being, which encourages people to look for God inside oneself and perceive the whole universe, including oneself, as the reflection of God. According to this philosophy, the universe on the macro level is a holographic model whose source is the energy, just like the neurons in the brain. Neurons in the brain. So what do they mean by this? When we look at the structure of the neurons, we see a similarity between the neurons and the superclusters, which is part of a greater size of the universe. And there was a famous study being done in Brandeis University. On the left, you see the neural connection of a mouse, and on the right, you see the connections of superclusters in the universe, a computer simulation. And researchers noticed that there is great resemblance in both of the system's qualities. And this subject brings us to this question: is the universe part of a larger mind? which
This becomes very
most of-
practical at the moment of death when there was an array of the spark gaps in your brain, the synapses, and you need to move out and inhabit a larger array. And if the larger array around you, the grid, et cetera, the song lines, is organized in centripetal, you can jump to and inhabit the larger array. And that transition requires understanding what makes that array inhabitable, namely centripetal force and fractality.
Nice. Thank you. Another example from a research paper published in the Journal of Neuroquantology proposes a fractal and holographic model of understanding the connection of consciousness at all levels, from micro to macro, and from the cellular level, or even the quantum level, starting from the most fundamental scales to star system, galaxies, and even the universe. This is called scale invariance, where fractal and holographic systems in this case are perfectly embedded one another, independent from their scales. Also a definition of perfect embedding or for entanglement, just like the graphic that Dan just described before.
Incidentally, that Meyer and Geesink, the authors there in that paper, we have an ongoing correspondence going on because they're playing with the frequency signatures now, and they even mentioned me in their recent publication. So they're pretty soon they're going to get to the golden ratio in Planck, but they're not quite there yet, but they're very close.
Yeah, and this study connects this intricate relationship of consciousness among the universe with the torus form. Also, a very short description of what fractal is. A fractal is a geometrical mathematical set that exhibits a repeating pattern displayed at every scale. We can call it scale invariant, self-embedding. So we need two distinct qualities for each fractal field. It has to be self-similar, and it needs to have repetition. As you can see in the example pictures here, all those systems specifically have self-similarity and repetition among themselves. The subject even brought itself to the cover of New Scientist magazine, and they are defining the universe as fractal. And the Nature magazine asks, is this the shape of the universe with a graphic of fractal phase conjugate golden ratio perfected dodecahedron, a fractal field? So these gentlemen, quantum physicists, Niels Bohr is one of the most respected quantum physicists in the world. In his examinations, he realizes the similarities between the quantum field and the holographic model. And Pribram was an expert on neuropsychology at Stanford University, and he was best known for his neurological research into memory, claiming that the brain was working with holographic principles, non-locality. David Bohm, another very famous quantum physicist, had suggested that were we to view the cosmos without the lenses that outfit our telescopes, the universe would appear to us as a hologram. Now, Pribram extended his insight by noting that were we deprived of the lenses of our eyes and the lens-like processes of our other sensory receptors, we would be immersed in holographic experiences.
It's
so
interesting.
all of these.
Just to say that our second international physics conference we organized in Budapest, Carl Pribram was very much involved. It was very colorful.
Nice. You should do it in Copenhagen next time. So this is the Copenhagen interpretation in 1925. And in this conference, Niels Bohr argued that the subatomic particles would only localize at the moment of observation, as we know from the famous double slit experiment. And what we say is conscious observation means consciousness creates charge implosion or charge fields to compress. Bohr and Einstein, they had different views. So Einstein attempted to break Bohr's Copenhagen interpretation by publishing the EPR paradox article. He could not succeed in breaking the interpretation. And furthermore, he identified entanglement as spooky action at a distance. Entanglement is a quantum state where two or more particles become correlated in a way that their states cannot be described independently of each other, even when separated by large distances. And Bohr argued that the two particles involved in entanglement are actually one. And he claimed that we are all part of this great singularity. And Dan Winter has also great insight to this with the longitudinal wave physics. I don't know if there's anything you would like to add here.
Well, it's just ironic that the same reason that Einstein thought action at a distance was spooky was he didn't understand the connection was through a longitudinal array. And that same longitudinal array has recently been defined as what a gravity wave is, which is also why Einstein didn't understand why objects fall to the ground. But Einstein was asking the right questions. And of course, he was a genius and solved incredible numbers of problems, but there's some key things that were really missing. Incidentally, just stepping back, Pribram's holographic universe model was essentially originally an investigation into a simple question. How could each part of a hologram contain information about the whole? And the answer obviously has something to do with perfected compression. So again, he was asking the right question.
Thank you. Last year, 5 months ago, these gentlemen had a groundbreaking experiment with entangled particles, which brought the Nobel Prize in physics. And what they did was they got two particles entangled together, put them in the same state, and then they took them apart. Vast distances apart from each other, and they measured that they still communicated instantaneously. And because of their scientific proof, this brought them the Nobel Prize in physics 5 months ago.
If you think about what's happening when the two particles are fused, what the connection between them that made them centripetal was that implosion to a longitudinal node at center, the physics of what enabled them to make gravity together. So when you then separate them, some component of that longitudinal array still exists between them as part of the Bell's theorem idea. So one way to prove that would prove that the communication between them also is idealized by golden ratio multiples times the speed of light, which I think is some of the next experiments should prove how phase conjugation actually perfects entanglement.
And I think it's very instructive in this below picture. Anton Zellinger holds a perfect golden ratio based Fullerene distribution model. It's a fractal charge implosive model is another definition for gravity. I would suggest then.
Yeah, that's beautiful because they're implying, well, there's a connection to entanglement and that implosion. So that's going to lead them eventually to the idea that entanglement is embedding perfected, which is the definition of golden ratio. And suddenly you arrive at phase conjugation, creating the longitudinal node that's enabling entanglement, the wormhole.
He must have watched some of your videos, I suppose. So this subject brings us to the concept: the observer is not separate from the object that is observed. As Dan says, we are all one particle, it just gets around.
Well, the joke was there's only one electron, it just gets around. But that picture reminds us of the exercise in the Steiner school where the kids visualize a rose and suddenly the room fills with the smell of roses. So they're creating fractality, and that implosion literally creates the infrared physics of bliss and the smell of bliss.
Right. And there's my favorite quote from Niels Bohr: everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real. And if quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet.
I think what was shocking is they were clinging to the illusion of particles. And once they realize it's all just a cluster of waves, then it's not even so shocking.
Right. So Carl Lashley on the left is another quantum physicist, and he spent something around 20 years of his life, around 40s and 50s, on experimenting laboratory mice. What he was doing was he was cutting the pieces of the mouse's brains and trying to understand where memory was located exactly. And after 20 years of his study, he concluded that, together with Pribram and Lashley, they both concluded that the best way to understand how memory works goes through understanding how brain works in holographic principles. So they were suggesting that the brain was working with holographic principles, basically.
I think that related, then Paul Peach wrote the famous book, Shuffle Brain, The Quest for Holographic Mind, where they fed pieces of one worm to the other worm and back and forth to try to prove that memory was shuffled in the brain. And there was some connection. When worm A eats part of worm B, then worm A suddenly has some of the memories of worm B.
Yeah. And this is a great book that I would like to suggest to anyone who is interested in studying holographic qualities of the universe. This was published in 1991 by Michael Talbot, and Michael writes about the nature of reality and explains his theory of the universe as one giant hologram. And unfortunately, he passed away 1 year after writing this book.
It's a classic. And incidentally, the coherent laser that's critical to creating a hologram then implies the coherence that ultimately enables matter to form, because obviously laser physics is what led us to phase conjugation.
Yeah. So the effect of consciousness on our perceived reality and this matrix has been a very intriguing subject, and many of the academics have taken this to their universities to study, to publish research papers. And one of them is Princeton Engineering Anomaly Research. And they have spent decades on analyzing or proving the claim that consciousness affects reality. So in one of the many tests that they did was they used a random number generator, a machine, and they would select people from the street, and they would invite them to their laboratories, and they would ask them to press the button while the machine works, this random number generator. And they would ask the subjects to, before pushing the button, they would ask them to focus on even or odd numbers, either even or odd. So they would like to see whether that would influence or affect the result. So they would focus on either even or odd number and then press the button, and the number would stop. And then they would take note of it. And after many years, they concluded that without any question, consciousness or intention definitely affects the outcome. But this was too much information for the academic science, I believe. They shut down the study group and closed the branch.
Well, you know, I think we always said that we thought there was some profound confusion there, because first of all, when it was originally called the Princeton Noosphere Project, for example, on the day of 9/11, when 3,000 people died, the random number generator had a huge glitch. Now, but if you ask any of those scientists how that works, they are functionally clueless. In fact, they say the random number generator is the output of the capacitance of a Josephson junction array. Now, what they don't understand is the Josephson junction array is simply an array of capacitor spark gaps. Well, if you happen to know how Hodowanic and Ramsey measured gravity waves, it was the same 25-cent array of capacitors, which is another way of saying, oh, we picked up compression in a longitudinal node, which is exactly the physics of how mind propagates. But these people were not anywhere close to understanding the physics of how longitudinal node compression arrays affect by capacitive coupling their random number generators. So they never even had a model hypothetically of how this worked. And that's why I think it was limited.
Yeah, interesting. And there are so many examples to this. Another one is another beautiful book, Conscious Acts of Creation. Dan has mentioned this a lot in his videos as well. And Will Tiller proved that focused human attention can reduce can affect the pH level of water, and it can also affect the death rate of the bacteria in laboratory conditions, and many more.
Effectively, it was a very elegant, because you could simply see that mind was compressing charge. So at least there you had a very specific outcome. Oh, focus attention compresses electric fields. Beautiful. They didn't even have a theory of how that worked at the time. Now we know exactly how that worked.
And by the way, I didn't put it in this presentation, but Dan's friend Glenn Ryan, who has his laboratory in New York, he also had beautiful examples about consciousness affecting reality in laboratory conditions like healing and so on.
And braiding DNA, yes, Glenn Ryan.
Right. So also the pineal gland as the main driving force of consciousness, as some say, and its symbol that was taken by many of the ancient cultures and used. When we look at the pine cone symbols, we see that there's also a perfection for golden ratio, why we define charge distribution efficiency. When we look at the pine cone from a top-down view, there are 13 spirals to one direction and 8 spirals to the other direction, which are all in line with the Fibonacci sequence, a natural way of nature perfecting itself towards golden ratio.
If you've ever felt your pineal gland burn, as in Kundalini you do, you realize the compression at the center is connecting to something. It feels like it's connecting to a lightning bolt, but that lightning bolt is basically a longitudinal array. So it's literally tuning up the radio to more compression and therefore being a bigger stargate.
Yep. And transhumanism. So transhumanism is the belief and ideology that humanity can evolve beyond its limitations by using technology. Frankly, I'm not a proponent of transhumanism. I'm not saying that technology is evil. There are good things about technology that we can implement in our lives. But at the same time, many of those discussions all boil down to who is using or who is pushing the technology and to what expense they are promoting this. This is mostly technology comes into our life and we see it as a control mechanism as well, controlling the masses. And one of the things that I would critique is that it diminishes some very vital capacities of human beings like creativity and imagination. And I believe that creativity and imagination are the driving force of consciousness in this reality. And I can give an example from alchemy. Among many definitions, one of the ways that I can simplify alchemy as an art of transmutation, a transmutation of consciousness, transmutation of the society and transmutation of heavy metals. And Philosopher's Stone was the quintessence of alchemy in this transmutation. And what transhumanists are doing is that they are using technology as the Philosopher's Stone to change the society and the consciousness. And while doing that, they are specifically focusing on genetics, robotics, information processing, and nanotechnology. So these are the critical sciences that they are advancing.
I think,
And
Tufan, maybe let's take a minute with that, if you don't mind. That it brings up the right issues. And I think Tufan brings up the right metaphor here, that alchemy is essentially successful compression. Obviously, that's the transformation, that's the transmutation. It's implosive compression. That's what alchemy is in the fusion of isotope transitions. Now, how is that key to understanding the difference between transhumanism and literally what is a soul? So, in fact, we're planning a program upcoming on saying that only if you know the actual biophysics of what is a soul can you actually make intelligent decisions about transhumanism. Sorry, guys.
that's okay.
Too many gadgets here. Apologize. But the point I wanted to make was that the physics of what is a soul is now quite clear. It is very simple. Under the conditions of coherence and bliss, your DNA recursively braid implodes and spits out longitudinal coherence, the Ba from the Ka, the rainbow light body, the Kesjan body. And that longitudinal coherent body is literally what enables you to lucid dream and take memory through death. That is the soul. That form of electromagnetic coherence, which is a result of DNA braid imploding bliss, that is the physics of soul. So once you understand that, that is your only possible doorway to any kind of successful death or immortality, then you could make a decision about what parts of transhumanism serve the soul and what parts don't. You could say, oh, so many clairvoyants saw people's aura dissociate from their center of gravity when they got medically stabbed. You could say, oh, if they put this circuit in my body, it's going to prevent my aura from imploding. So after, and only after you know electrically what a soul is, can you make any intelligent decision about what transhumanism is useful. So, and actually, could governments make decisions about medical practices and how to design hospitals? So effectively, until we can teach this civilization of electrically what a soul is, they're going to be blind. And this is very serious because, you know, AI and transhumanism and the Borg is the scourge, not just of this planet, but the tens of thousands of humanoid cultures in the galaxy. So I say it's critical that we prove what it is to have a soul so we can make intelligent decisions electrically about our AI and our transhumanism. So we're working on that, guys. I think we should really gather the evidence and gather our team and make that case. Anyway, so that's, I'll get off the stump now. Tufan. Thank you.
Thank you then. One of the main, one of the main proponents of transhumanism is the main advisor of Google, Ray Kurzweil, has this famous singularity concept, the builder of the concept. And he claims that transhumanism is the manifestation of human consciousness throughout the universe. And they have a specific agenda which focuses on the singularity concept. And they have created a diagram some 10 years ago about this, is about the acceleration of technology in time. As you can see, it goes in a exponential pace. So this was done in 2011. And according to this chart, they are planning to surpass brain power of mouse in 2015. And surpass brain power of human in 2023. And then surpasses brain power equivalent to that of all human brains combined in 2045. Well, with the current developments in technological areas like the launch of ChatGPT and AI softwares like Wall-E and others like CRISPR gene technology things, I can see that there are some quite serious advancements in technology, and if they seriously surpass brain power this year, I wouldn't surprise, because it is moving quite fast, and the new ChatGPT version will soon take place in the markets this year, only after 4 or 5 months of its previous version's launch.
The tragedy here is that they're evaluating evolution based on what they're calling human brain power, which is some analytical processing. But literally everything at the top of this chart is moving towards soullessness, which is a disaster until we understand. Because actually, the ultimate form of connectivity is the longitudinal array, effectively DNA, radio, and song lines in the dream cell. And that form of connectivity is well beyond the internet. That is evolution. So building soulless AI ultimately is the problem. It's not the solution. And until people know what a soul is, they will believe charts like this and think, oh, the machines are more evolved. Well, guess what? They're not, because they're soulless and they don't know what a soul is.
Right, and technology has this tendency to substitute the important biological talents, substituting with technology. For example, instead of using telepathy, now we use telecommunication and such services.
And not one of these machines is ever going to be able to lucid dream, because you don't have intelligent plasma there. So you can't even define evolution until you know what a soul is. That actual connection with the longitudinal array, that's biology. This is soulless machines.
I'm continuing the horror presentation.
Sorry, I get over-enthused. Apologies.
No, that's okay. So this one is a Russian project, 2045 Strategic Social Initiative, and this was started by this Russian guy called I didn't note his name anyway. So this initiative again focuses on 2045 as a singularity point, and very quickly it gained recognition among the establishment. And I'll go over the milestones of this project. So you see there are 4 levels, 4 milestones while going to that focus point. The first one is between 2015 and 2020, which is a robotic copy of a human body remotely controlled via BCI, a brain-computer interface. And between 2020 and 2025, an avatar in which a human brain is transplanted at the end of one's life. Now, Avatar C, between 2030 and 2035, an avatar with an artificial brain in which a human personality is transferred at the end of one's life. And the last stage, between 2040 and 45, a hologram-like avatar where beings would reside in softwares like computers. So another famous proponent of the system is Dalai Lama. No comment. And also famous individuals from the New Age movement like Deepak Chopra. According to this article, the article claims that Deepak Chopra uploaded his consciousness to the AI Foundation to ensure he would be around to chat with future generations. Hey, Of course, one can always ask, is it possible to upload consciousness or soul? And the horror movie continues. In 2013, neuroscientists plant false memories in the brain. So MIT study also pinpoints where the brain stores memory traces, both false and authentic. So MIT scientists have shown that they can plant false memories in the brains of mice. And they also found that many of the neurological traces of these memories are identical in nature to those of authentic memories. So, was it a heavy piece of information or what? You know, you can say that this is a small step, this is a small advancement, and it cannot come to the transfer of consciousness. But with the pace of the advancement, for me, it is really difficult to foresee what kind of technological tools they may bring upon. And I would also like to remind that whatever we see in this world as technological usage, we have to make sure that these were all once used by the military industrial complex, because all the technologies are first used there. Once they use it, and once the benefit of it ends, then they say, okay, now we can give this to public. So, and by the way, this was done 10 years ago. So I cannot imagine what kind of technologies they have now. Another one, memory transfer between snails. Now, UCLA neuroscientists reported that they have transferred a memory from one animal to another via injections of RNA, a startling result that challenges the widely held view of where and how memories are stored in the brain. And some topics related to transferring of consciousness. Brain-computer interfaces, systems that allow direct communication with the brain, between the brain and an external device such as computer or a robotic system. Whole brain emulation is a hypothetical process of scanning and mapping the brain in detail and creating a digital copy of a biological brain that can run on a computer or an artificial substrate. Mind uploading startups.
You know, in a way, this idea of transferring consciousness is, for people who only understand the computer metaphor, is actually clueless, because we know exactly what consciousness is in the brain. It's a plasma vortex that comes to focus when the right brainwave harmonics. So literally a plasma tornado has to inhabit the brain. That's the physics of incarnating. So it's literally a biologic plasma vortex that puts consciousness inside your head. And this bit about using these computers to do it is bullshit. Thank you very much. Anyway, you heard my opinion.
Right. So mind uploading startups, while the idea of transferring consciousness to an artificial body is still largely speculative, there are some startups and companies that are exploring related concepts. For example, a company called Nectome is developing a process of brain preservation that involves vitrifying the brain and uploading its contents to a computer in the hopes of creating a digital copy of a person's mind. However, this process is highly controversial and has been criticized by some experts as being unfeasible or unethical.
Remember, none of these people have a clue what consciousness is, because they can't tell you how your consciousness can move outside your head during near-death experiences. But we know it's a plasma vortex. So in effect, you could move consciousness around if you knew how to move a living plasma vortex. And these guys don't know what consciousness is, so they don't have a chance.
Right. Another example, new startup wants to transfer your consciousness to an artificial body so you can live forever. Now, this one from 2015, and the CEO of Humai, Josh Bocanegra, says, quote, "We are using artificial intelligence and nanotechnology to store data of conversational styles, behavioral patterns, thought processes, and information about how your body functions from the inside out. This data will be coded into multiple sensor technologies, which will be built into an artificial body with the brain of a deceased human. Using cloning technology, we will restore the brain as it matures.
Well, they got one thing right, turning inside out.
Right. Another news about time reversal. Now we know that time reversal was first proved in optic physics, physics of optics, and through four-way mixing with phase conjugate material. And this is a recent news, and they say that an international team of scientists claim to have found a way to speed up, slow down, and even reverse the clock of a given system by taking advantage of the unusual properties of the quantum world. So as far as I understand, they are basically manipulating the speed and the direction of particles, basically, by doing that.
It's a bit ironic because originally Einstein said time slows down or speeds up during acceleration, and he didn't understand that time was only a name for rotation rate. So obviously, if you speed up or slow down a vortex, a toroid of charge called an atom, that the relative spin rate at the center by translation of vorticity will increase or decrease. That's the time reversal that Einstein spoke about. Now, when you talk to phase conjugate optics, when they say time reversal, all they mean is it returns to a state of previous order.
Right.
So they don't, it's very specific that time reversal in phase conjugate optics is always toward order. So these people who are talking about time reversal don't actually understand what was learned in phase conjugate optics, because they don't know that you can't move backward toward disorder.
Right. And these concepts reminds us the movie Inception, where in the movie, when they sleep, they go to a lucid dream state, and in that lucid dream state, they go to the lower dreams, sub dreams, and each sub dream passes slower in time compared to the upper dream.
And there might be some good physics there, because that's how longitudinal arrays are embedded, and that's what you need to inhabit in the lucid dream.
Right. So many of the sci-fi movies come as technological advancement in time, and I would like to also give credit to Philip K. Dick as the mastermind of many of those movies, including The Matrix. And Philip K. Dick is also famous for his remembrance of his death. He really has very interesting things in his life. I would suggest everyone to research Philip K. Dick. And you might have watched the Minority Report movie. And in this movie, they were trying to catch the people who are going to do a crime or something. And there is also a technology for this already working, which they developed in 2008 by the Homeland Security, a future attribute screening technology. And what they do is they screen somewhere around 15 or 20 variables of the human body, like your heart rate, body temperature, breathing patterns, or eye twitchings, and they try to take these data and profile it, and if it fits to specific profiles, they understand that you have a tendency to commit a crime. And in the first 6 months of their trial period, they catched a success rate of 80% in 2008. They started using this in the airports, basically. And this simulation argument, this is Nick Bostrom, and the simulation hypothesis proposes that all of our existence is a simulated reality, such as a computer simulation. And Nick Bostrom is a Swedish philosopher with a background in theoretical physics, computational neuroscience, logic, and artificial intelligence. And the simulation argument suggests that at least one of the following propositions is true. One, the human species is very likely to go extinct before reaching a post-human stage. Two, any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of simulations of their evolutionary history or variations thereof. Three, we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. So maybe I'll give an example to explain this theory. Let's say, take this world that we live in, and the technology advances to a point, let's say this singularity point, and we start creating sub-realities in softwares, let's say, to make it easier, in computers, let's say. And we start putting beings inside, and we said specifically that they don't remember where they come from. They don't remember the upper reality. They live there, they spend lifetimes from scratch, let's say, and then they develop themselves, they develop the civilization that lives in that sub-reality. And at one point, they become like us, and they also advance their technology, and they start creating sub-realities. So what happens is that in this lifetime, we are creating a sub-reality, and in that sub-reality, they also create sub-realities. So theoretically, this can continue until forever, the argument suggests. And if each civilization who are in a specific sub-reality cannot perceive the upper reality, then he claims that we have no chance or way of understanding who created us, or if whether we came from a higher reality or not, because we cannot perceive it. So there's this quote from Sherlock Holmes: when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. In the same way, if one tries to eliminate the impossible, then Nick Bostrom suggests that we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. And when we say computer simulation, it does have a negative feeling to it, because now we know about the transhumanism and the agenda behind it, and why they are wanting to push us into specific technological advancement. But it doesn't have to be like that in every possible alternative realities. So there could be better purposes, maybe not in our current environment, not in our current reality, because the world is run by psychopaths right now, and I'm sure all of us are in agreement on this. But theoretically, there is a chance that we may be living in a simulation, I suggest. And this simulation doesn't have to be a cold one. Be it a simulation or not, the natural laws would still be valid, be it a simulation or not. So the law of correspondence, or yin and yang, or the frequencies, they would still be valid there, present there. And there's a movie, The 13th Floor, I would suggest everyone to watch. Exactly delves into this subject that we are talking about. And another interesting point, this is James Gates, another theoretical physicist, and he was studying on the quantum field, string theory, technically. And while he was working on the string theory, he noticed a specific code in the fabric of space and time. And he describes that this set of codes are not only random codes, but they contain intelligence in them. So it was created by an intelligence. So they are not random. and it consists of zeros and ones. And when I looked at this diagram, the distribution of the patterns, I immediately recognized a hypercube. And the hypercube was first brought into modern science by Dr. John Dee, the advisor of Queen Elizabeth I. In his diaries, we understand that he was using many geometries, and one of them was the hypercube geometry to communicate with beings, extraterrestrial beings or angels. And this is also public information in the British Museum. So it's very interesting what James Gates has found. Then maybe he recently really figured out that what John Dee discovered intuitively, seriously.
Well, there could be a little redemption here in the sense that a redemption from the simulated reality too, because if that's right about emulating the hypercube, the significance of the hypercube was if you rotate it correctly, actually the hypercube then becomes the dodeca. That's the argument Vincent and I had for a lifetime. And that means the hypercube is more than metaphor for when the array became centripetal. And that's the moment it becomes self-aware. So effectively, if the code is the hypercube, that's beautiful, because that's moving toward the idea that to superpose another axis of spin around the cube, although it's animated this way, in fact, the ultimate solution is to rotate a cube into a dodeca, making it implosive, negentropic, and self-aware, the beginnings of soul. So, and that's actually where John Dee was going, even though he didn't quite get there.
I see. What if could there be both the hypercube in this sense and in the sense that you suggest in the form of a dodecahedron, a cube moving with a dodeca symmetry? Could both of them exist simultaneously?
Well, the idea is the 6 cubes around 1 to the 7th is a metaphor for the 7-axis spin of a tetracube. But in actual wave mechanics, the only way you can superpose another axis of spin around a cube of nodes is to actually tilt that cube and rotate it into a dodeca. So that was the ultimate solution. And that points to exactly where John Dee was going, because he needed to be at the center of those nodes. He called it scintillation, and he used the spark gaps of the scintillation to communicate with ancestors. So obviously the nodes were imploding in the array, and that connected to the longitudinal array, and that was ancestor phone calls, which is John Dee's life. So actually the hypercube was his way of learning about dodeca golden ratio conjugate implosion, but he never got there. But he did know that if you imploded, you got to ancestor memories and spirit communication.
Right. Another interesting question is the availability of resources to simulate the universe, because this was studied by many researchers to answer the question, do we have available resources to simulate any type of universe? And in 2001, the MIT scientist Seth Lloyd did the first analysis, and he concluded that it would be impossible to simulate the universe, because he claimed that, first of all, you would need more energy than the current universe has, and you would need a bigger computer than the universe. And in that simulated universe, the time had to pass slower than this one.
But those who actually know what the next dimension is, which is where phase conjugation makes the longitudinal nodes more dense and more fractal, understand that intelligent beings live inside of larger arrays, and we're not a simulation for them. We're actually embedded in their body. And so that conversation is actually much more advanced once we understand what consciousness is, the compression into these longitudinal arrays, which are inhabitable when the vortex are nested. So that the whole idea of the simulation is actually leading to how can we be embedded in a larger mind, and that's real.
Another perspective to that by some other researchers about the same question. Is it doable to simulate the universe? They said that if you can create a universe not perfectly but slightly less perfect, then you could do it. So what they mean is the being inside the universe would not understand that it's not perfect. He or she would see that it's a perfect universe, but there would be minor errors. Like, let's say we know that consciousness creates charge implosion, or active observation collapses the wave function. They claim that if a universe created in a way that, like a computer game, when you look at a computer game on the screen, you just see whatever there is on the screen, and you don't see the other parts, where the other parts are not in your visual perspective anyway. So they are just in the waveforms. And they claim that whatever you see, they just actualize, they localize, or the charge implodes. And if you can create such a universe where the observer only sees or processes the information that is available to his or her point of view, then you can use the energy efficiently, and you wouldn't need to process all the universal information in such a program, they suggest. And this very much reminds us the famous double-slit experiment, where conscious observation implodes charge or collapses the wave function in the same way.
And there's so much to be learned about, when you look at your hand, you wake up and your dream is lucid because you introduced compression. And that your dream then got leverage on the array. And that's actually how you inhabit arrays. So that's the higher consciousness view of actually compression and array inhabiting. Waking up in the dream is densification.
Right. And that perspective also suggests that, as I said, wherever you observe becomes processable in your vision, in your perception, in your consciousness, and wherever you don't look at becomes a waveform and is not processed to save energy from such a simulation. And some examples about the proponents of this hypothesis is the theoretical physicist Thomas Campbell has this huge book called My Big Toe. He goes into detail about how a universe can be simulated. Have you ever looked into this, Dan? Do you know Thomas
Theory
Campbell?
of everything. Thomas Campbell is quite famous. And theories of everything are useful because people are really trying to, but until they understand centripetal forces and negentropy, I don't think they get there. But, in terms of doors of perception, there are multiple theories of consciousness based on phase conjugation causing perception. So that fits. And
also Anthony Peake talks about different states of consciousness and the qualities of reality. I would suggest people to look into his work. And fractal games are already in place. They are in our lives. There's a game called No Man's Sky, which has 18 quadrillion planets inside. with different faunas and floras and physical laws. And one can ask, how can one fit such an information in a computer game? And this was all done through fractal formulas. You don't have to spend the time and energy for each one of the planets. You just spend time and energy for one planet. You set the fauna, you set the flora, you set all the physical laws, and then keep that on one side. And with the next planet in the same star system, you say, okay, I'm going to multiplying all specific variables with 1.1, just giving you an example, and other variables with 1.2, and that's it. You create the second planet, same way, third planet, fourth planet, and then the next star system, and then the next galaxy and then the next universes and so on. With just very simple fractal formulas, one can, create computer games with quadrillions of planets, each having different. Yeah.
Tufan, there's a note here in the conversation too, that these are examples of fractal-based procedural rendering. So as you zoom into the render, you get increased resolution using fractal-based rendering. But unfortunately, that probably doesn't actually emulate the way in which fractality creates consciousness, which really probably is not quite part of those simulations.
Another proponent, Elon Musk, he says, quote, "It's almost certain that we are living in some version of the Matrix." And there was another interesting report from Bank of America analysts.
I don't think I like that.
Yeah, they think that there's a 50% chance that we live in the Matrix. Now, Bank of America are famous for their, financial monthly reports and so on. So interesting that they took this subject up to their reports. And I think that's about all for tonight. I just wanted to bring this idea and claims about artificial intelligence and simulation argument, how they are seeing this. I hope you enjoyed it.
Really, Tufan, I think that was so useful because it gets us thinking about how urgent it is we understand the physics of soul. Otherwise, we're going to get lost in the gravy of the AI and the computer intelligence, thinking that because their CPU is better, that means they're better than the human brain, when they don't understand what makes a brain potentially immortal. So we need to know what soul and consciousness is desperately, as a living plasma vortex, which transcends many of these arguments. But anyway, Tufan, there was some fun questions, and like Tomislav says, is imagination itself a form of virtual simulation? ?
I would say no, but I think, well, this is, for me, the main war that there is right now, the war on consciousness, imagination, and creativity. And I think with all these new softwares, they are trying to diminish the capacity of human creativity and those abilities to create our physical reality, to manifest our, life, reality.
Maybe you could turn off your screen there. We can see your face a little better. But
Sure.
well, I think that's well put, Tufan. I'd like to use the example when Steiner said that children who spend too much time passively in front of computer screens lose the inner muscle it takes to imagine. What did he mean? Which was the inner muscle that's required to imagine IMAG, matrix of Agni, matrix of fire, that the child that could not form a picture of a rose inside their head with eyes closed cannot make the room fill with the smell of roses. Now that's an example of imagination. And literally the hologram inside your head has learned to implosively compress fractally. And that's the beginning of psychokinesis and soul. That's imagination. And that inner muscle is lost if children have all their images pushed at them externally and they don't practice actually. In the Steiner school, they draw the rose and they focus. And so this was an example of imagination is not just virtual simulation. It is the muscle required to assemble waves into a geometry that's centripetal and alive. So the muscle it takes to push a vortex to a point is specifically what enables the children to see without their eyes. That muscle is measurable when their brainwaves do golden ratio, but that doesn't mean we can teach them to do it unless they learn inside what it is to imagine. You got a plasma vortex inside your head, and only if you can use your will to get that plasma vortex to come to a focus which we now know is alpha to gamma brainwave cascade imploding that vortex, that's the moment the child says, oh, this little wormhole opened inside my head. It's called an eyeball, and I can see I can see blindfolded. And by the way, that's the moment they can see their ancestors as well. details. So that's imagination. Anyway, okay, more questions in the window. There was related, is virtual simulation the same as reality projection? That's the thing. A virtual simulation can create an array which enables you to manipulate. If you dream it clear enough, then you're going to have an effect on reality. So the moment your dream is lucid is when you can go there and do something which is later testable. So the physics of what defines which dream is lucid may in fact be the answer to your question. Do you see any other fun questions in the chat window, Tufan? What do you think?
I didn't have a chance to follow the chat window, frankly, but I would say this whole discussion really triggers very interesting concepts, hopefully, in all of us. And, my life perspective has always been on trying to understand what I am experiencing from the point of view what that may represent in my inner world or in my consciousness.
Exactly.
Because there is both the individual consciousness and the collective consciousness, and like the things that we experience or we see on Earth doesn't necessarily have to be connected directly with our own soul. They may come from a collective point of view as well, but that collective might be the one as well. So it's a bit complicated subject, but I'm happy to question all those things, be it the manipulations, be it the wars, and try to understand what happened in our collective consciousness that we are all experiencing or observing these conflicts, major conflicts. So I am always trying to understand what is the problem with our collective genetics or collective history that we are all seeing this. And I know that Dan has great insight with his ET theory, the history of the DNA and the war on one of the spiral arms of the galaxy.
The Orion Wars.
Yes, the Orion Wars.
But I think, Tufan, you bring up an excellent point here. The reason we don't really have a functioning collective conscious is actually we haven't learned to lucid dream together, actually, where ancient tribes, they did. And so the experience of a group fusing enough to lucid dream as a group is very analogous to two particles becoming embedded and then forever connected. The physics is the same. It's a longitudinal array, and that's actually teachable. So there was one question in the window here. Can we develop that inner muscle of imagination as an adult that hasn't learned to use it? That's a very good question. The theory is when your brainwave cascades, like, for example, I can make the low frequencies, but not too much up in the gamma. And maybe, am I too old? So I have great bliss, but and some clairaudience, but not a lot of clairvoyance. So that analog applies nicely to the groups that are teaching children to see without their eyes. And they all say the same things. The adults can learn also, but it's more work for them. It's easier to learn as a kid, obviously. But this is interesting, so that effectively, the imagination that gets leverage on the reality is when the hologram in your optical cortex is in phase with reality, which has to do with grounding, of course. That's why the lady with the mirror and the magnifying glass, she goes back to the physicist who made the hologram of her mirror and a magnifying glass saying, oh, I can't see myself in this hologram of a mirror and magnifying glass. It only magnifies something inside the hologram and not me. But if you found the original light that made the hologram of the mirror and the magnifying glass, then suddenly something outside the hologram begins to appear in the hologram. What makes the hologram inside your head embed in the hologram outside your head the phase discipline that climaxes in obviously longitudinal coherence, what makes dreams lucid. So we can have fun with that metaphor, but it's getting late. I think we had fun. Yeah. So how are imagination and lucid dreaming related? Well, that's what we're saying, that imagination becomes lucid dreaming when it becomes spin dense. So there you are, you're dreaming, and you look at your hand in the dream, the do loop tightens, and your plasma field gets more centripetal and emits more longitudinal coherence, and suddenly you can inhabit that larger array. And the Aboriginal shaman is manipulating things down the song line. That's longitudinal coherence. Anyway, I think that was a happily ever after. I think we want to thank Tufan very much. Thank you guys for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Dan.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I would like to add just one thing. Yes, as an adult, always remember it's concentration and discipline. Every 7 years, your whole body repairs itself. I want everybody to understand that in the next 2 days is going to be the full moon. So I would like everybody to connect on the lucid dreaming channels, on the Discords, on all the Facebook channels. And I thank everybody. If everybody wants to look, you can see. Oh, could you see the moon right now?
Yes, we can. Cool.
Yeah. In 2 days, it's going to be the full moon. So I thank everybody and love, blessings.
Blessings, you guys.
Thank you, Tribe.
Thank you. Stay tuned. To be continued. The soul is coming. Blessings. Bye-bye.
Blessings. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.
That was great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.